The wind off Lake Superior cut through fabric like it had a personal grudge against warmth. November in Duluth, Minnesota, meant gray skies that pressed down on the city like a lid on a pot threatening to boil over, and Rachel Morrison stood on the cracked sidewalk of Harbor Street, staring at a building that looked like hope had packed its bags and left decades ago. The structure squatted at the end of a dead-end road where the industrial district gave up and surrendered to the lake. 3 stories of brick and rot, windows boarded over with plywood that had weathered to the color of despair. A faded sign above the door read, "Superior Telegraph Station," in letters that had lost most of their paint to time and Lake Superior's merciless winters. The building leaned slightly to the east, as if trying to walk into the water and end its misery. Rachel's 7-year-old daughter, Lily, pressed against her side, small hands clutching the worn fabric of Rachel's thrift store coat. The girl's breath came out in white puffs that dissolved into the November cold. Her pink backpack, decorated with unicorn stickers that were peeling at the edges, sagged on shoulders too small to carry the weight of everything they owned. "Mommy, it looks scary." Rachel knelt down, meeting her daughter's eyes. Brown, like her father's. The only thing Marcus had left them besides debt and broken promises. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, practiced from months of pretending everything would be okay when nothing had been okay for a very long time. "I know, sweetheart, but it's ours now. We're going to make it better." Lily's lower lip trembled. "Can I have my own room?" The question landed like a stone in Rachel's chest. They'd been living in the Honda Accord for 4 months now, parked in different Walmart lots each night to avoid police attention. Lily slept across the back seat, Rachel in the front with the seat reclined as far as it would go, which wasn't far enough to prevent her back from screaming by morning. Their belongings fit in 3 garbage bags and a cardboard box that smelled faintly of the Chinese takeout it had originally contained. "Soon, baby. I promise. As soon as I can fix it up." Lily nodded, trusting in a way that made Rachel want to cry and scream simultaneously. Her daughter believed in her, believed that mommy could fix anything, could make the world safe and warm and stable. The weight of that faith pressed down harder than the gray Minnesota sky. Rachel stood slowly, her knees protesting the cold and the 4 months of sleeping in positions the human body was never designed to tolerate. She pulled the crumpled auction receipt from her pocket, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded approximately 60 times since yesterday. Property auction, Lot 47, Superior Telegraph Station, Harbor Street. Final bid, $1. Buyer, Rachel Morrison. $1. She'd spent her last dollar on a building that looked like it was actively trying to collapse. She had $11.37 in her checking account, half a tank of gas in the Honda, and a master's degree in electrical engineering that 3 years of applications had proven was worth exactly nothing in an economy that had decided she was simultaneously overqualified and unemployable. The auction had been a last resort discovered while searching Duluth County's website for any information about emergency housing assistance. She'd found the delinquent property listings instead, buildings the county was desperate to offload after years of unpaid taxes. Most had minimum bids in the thousands. But Lot 47 had been listed at $1, with a warning in red text, "Severe structural damage. Buyer assumes all liability. No warranties expressed or implied. Demolition costs estimated at $45,000. Rachel had stared at that listing for 3 hours in the library, Lily doing homework beside her, the heating vent above them the only source of warmth they'd had all day. A building for $1. A place to exist that wasn't a car. For walls and a roof, however damaged, however broken. She'd clicked the purchase button at 11:47 p.m., sitting in the Walmart parking lot with the Honda's engine running for heat, using the last of her phone's data. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later, official and binding and terrifying. "Congratulations on your purchase. Keys available for pickup at County Administrative Building, room 203. That had been yesterday. Today, she stood in front of the building that was somehow, impossibly, legally hers, and tried to figure out if she'd made the bravest decision of her life or the stupidest. A truck rolled past on Harbor Street, slowing as it approached. The driver, a man in his 50s with a beard that looked like it had its own weather system, leaned out the window. His voice carried the particular tone of someone delivering mockery disguised as concern. "You the lady who bought the old Telegraph Station?" Rachel straightened her spine, forcing her voice to stay level. "Yes." The man laughed, actually laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "Well, good luck with that. Place has been condemned since '98. City tried to tear it down twice, but the Historical Society threw a fit. Now it's just rotting. Hope you got good insurance, lady. Whole thing's probably coming down next winter." More laughter erupted from inside the truck cab. Rachel could see other faces, other men enjoying her stupidity, her desperation visible like a neon sign. The truck accelerated away, spraying slush from a puddle across Rachel's jeans. She didn't react outwardly. She learned not to. But inside, the familiar tightness seized her chest. The feeling that started in crowded grocery stores when someone stood too close in line, when doors slammed too hard, when the world felt like it was closing in and she couldn't breathe properly and her hand started to shake. Lily grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. "Mommy, you're doing the thing." The thing was what Lily called Rachel's panic attacks. The child had learned to recognize them at age 5, had learned to hold her mother's hand and count breaths and wait for the storm to pass. No 7-year-old should have to be that competent at managing their parents' trauma, but necessity had made Lily grow up faster than childhood should allow. Rachel squeezed back, focusing on the small hand in hers. Warm, real, anchoring. She counted breaths like the VA therapist had taught her during the 3 sessions her insurance had covered before deciding PTSD treatment was a luxury rather than a necessity. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. The tightness eased slightly. Not gone, never fully gone, but manageable. "I'm okay, baby. Let's go see our new house." The key the county clerk had given her was old brass, heavy in her palm, attached to a paper tag that read Superior Telegraph Station. Main entrance, 1924. Rachel fitted into the lock, surprised when it turned smoothly. Someone had maintained this lock, had kept it functional despite the building's obvious deterioration. The door opened with a groan that sounded like a warning. The smell hit immediately. Dust and decay and something else. Oil, maybe an old paper, and the particular staleness of air that hadn't circulated in years. But underneath that, something metallic and precise, like the smell of Rachel's father's electronics workshop before he died. Rachel pulled out her phone, turning on the flashlight. The battery was at 23%, which meant she had maybe an hour before it died, and she needed to find somewhere to charge it. The library, probably, or maybe McDonald's if she bought something small enough to justify sitting there. The light revealed an entrance hall that stretched back into darkness. The floor was concrete, cracked but solid. To the left, a staircase climbed into shadows. To the right, a corridor led deeper into the building. And straight ahead, double doors stood slightly ajar, revealing a vast open space beyond. Lily pressed close, her hand tight in Rachel's. "Is it safe?" Rachel tested the floor with her weight, feeling for give or weakness. The concrete held firm. Her engineering training kicked in automatically, assessing load-bearing capacity, structural integrity, failure points. The building was old, definitely neglected, but the bones felt solid in a way that surprised her. "Stay close to me. Don't touch anything until I check it first." They moved forward slowly, Rachel's phone light cutting through the darkness like a knife through fabric. The main room revealed itself in stages as they entered. It was enormous, easily 60 feet by 40 feet, with ceilings that soared 20 feet above them. Along one wall, massive windows had been boarded over, but gaps between the plywood let in thin streams of November light that striped the floor with gray. But what made Rachel stop, what made her breath catch in her throat, was the equipment. The room was filled with machines. Rows of them, sitting on long wooden tables that ran the length of the space. Telegraph equipment, she realized, actual vintage telegraph machines with their distinctive brass keys and mechanical receivers. Some were small desktop units. Others were massive installations that looked like they belonged in museums. Rachel moved closer, her engineering eye cataloging details automatically. These weren't just old machines. These were pristine. No dust covered the brass keys. No rust marred the metal components. Someone had maintained this equipment, had cared for it, had kept it functional long after the building had been abandoned to tax delinquency. She ran her finger along one of the telegraph keys. The brass was smooth, cool, perfectly balanced. This was craftsmanship from an era when things were built to last centuries, not years. When repair was cheaper than replacement and skill mattered more than convenience. Lily had wandered to the far side of the room, her small form silhouetted against the boarded windows. "Mommy, there's more doors back here." Rachel followed, her phone light bouncing across the walls. 3 doors lined the back wall, all closed. The first opened onto a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. The second revealed what looked like an office, papers still scattered across a desk like someone had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. The third door was locked, secured with a modern padlock that looked wildly out of place against the building's obvious age. "Why is that one locked?" Lily's question was whisper quiet, curious, and slightly afraid. "I don't know, baby." Rachel tried the key she'd been given. It didn't fit the padlock. This was something different, something added after the building had been abandoned. Someone had locked that door specifically, had wanted to keep something in or keep something out. A sound echoed through the building. Footsteps on the floor above them, heavy and deliberate. Then another sound like furniture being dragged across wood. Rachel's hand instinctively went to Lily's shoulder, pulling her daughter close. Her heart kicked against her ribs, adrenaline flooding her system with the familiar cocktail of fight or flight that PTSD had made her constant companion. "Who's there?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt, carrying authority she'd learned in the army, before deployment, before everything changed. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down, thick and expectant. Then a voice drifted down the stairwell, rough and suspicious. "Who's asking?" "Rachel Morrison. I own this building now." "Who are you?" A pause, long enough that Rachel's hand moved to her pocket where she kept the small canister of pepper spray that was her only defense beyond words and bluffing. Then the voice came again, closer now, and a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. An old man, maybe 70, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better decades. His white hair stuck up in directions that suggested recent sleep or profound disregard for grooming. He held a flashlight in one hand and what looked like a wrench in the other. "You're the one who bought it?" His tone carried disbelief and something else. Hope, maybe buried under decades of disappointment. "Yesterday. County auction." "Who are you?" The old man descended the stairs slowly, joints protesting the movement audibly. Up close, Rachel could see his face was weathered like driftwood, eyes sharp despite their age, hands marked with old scars that spoke of decades of manual work. "Thomas Brennan. Tommy to people who don't irritate me yet. I'm the telegraph operator." Rachel blinked. The building's been closed since the 90s. Building closed. Station never stopped operating. He said it like it was obvious, like Rachel was missing something fundamental about the difference. "I maintain the equipment. Monitor the frequencies. Keep the history alive. You've been living here 32 years. Since the telegraph company went bankrupt and the building went to tax auction the first time. I bought it for $500. Kept it running until I couldn't pay the property taxes anymore. County seized it in '03. I stayed anyway. Nobody cared enough to kick out an old man maintaining antiques." Lily pressed closer to Rachel, eyeing Tommy with the wariness children reserved for strangers who didn't fit standard adult categories. Rachel felt her own wariness, but underneath that, a strange sort of relief. This man had kept the building standing, had prevented the total collapse the county had warned about. Maybe he could help. "I'm not here to kick you out. I'm here because I need a place to live, and this was all I could afford." Tommy studied her with the intensity of someone reading text written in small print. His eyes moved from Rachel's worn coat to Lily's too thin frame, to the way both of them held themselves with the particular tension of people who'd been homeless long enough to recognize it in each other. You were military. It wasn't a question. Rachel had learned that veterans could spot each other, some invisible marker that transcended uniform or circumstance. Army. Combat engineer. 2 deployments. Iraq. Afghanistan. Tommy nodded slowly, like that explained everything that needed explaining. I was Navy. Vietnam. 68 to 71. Communications specialist. He gestured to the telegraph equipment around them. That's how I ended up here after discharge. Studied Morse code during service. Fell in love with telegraph history. Spent 40 years collecting this equipment, restoring it, keeping the old skills alive. Why stay after you lost the building? Where else was I going to go? This place is my life's work. Every machine in here, I restore it personally. These aren't museum pieces. They're functional tools, maintained and operational. Someone needs to remember how they work, how to repair them, how communication happened before satellites and fiber optics. Rachel walked slowly between the rows of equipment, her phone light playing across brass and wire and mechanisms so intricate they looked like sculpture. Is any of this valuable? To collectors, sure. Some of these units are worth thousands to the right buyer. But selling them would be like selling my own memories. I'd rather die here than watch this history scattered to private collections where nobody appreciates what it represents. Lily had been exploring along the wall, small fingers tracing patterns in the dust that had accumulated on surfaces Tommy, apparently, didn't maintain as carefully as his telegraphs. She stopped suddenly, her voice cutting through the conversation with a particular pitch that meant she'd found something interesting. Mommy, these bricks are different. Rachel moved to where Lily stood, Tommy following with his flashlight. The child was right. A section of the brick wall, maybe 4 feet wide and extending from floor to ceiling, was constructed of slightly different bricks. The color matched, but the mortar was newer, the surface less weathered than the surrounding wall. Tommy's face changed, something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite fear, but close to it. Wariness wrapped in recognition. Don't worry about that section. It's just where they did repairs back in the 60s. But Rachel's engineering training was screaming that something was wrong with that explanation. The mortar wasn't from the 60s. It was maybe 20 years old, possibly less. This wall section had been built or rebuilt relatively recently, long after the building's original construction. She pressed her palm against the bricks, feeling for temperature differential. The wall was cold, colder than the surrounding sections. That meant either thinner construction or empty space behind, possibly both. What's behind this wall, Tommy? Nothing. Just structural support. Then why is it colder than the rest of the wall? Tommy's jaw tightened. He looked at Rachel, then at Lily, then back at Rachel. Some internal calculation was happening, some decision being made about trust and secrets, and whether this stranger who'd bought his life's work for $1 deserved truth or protection. You bought the building. You own it. But some things are better left alone. The words hung in the dusty air like a warning and a challenge simultaneously. Rachel felt that familiar tightness in her chest again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was curiosity mixed with caution. The engineers need to understand structures and their secrets. I need to know what's in my building, Tommy. Especially if it's something that could be dangerous. It's not dangerous. It's protected. Protected from what? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face struggling with something that looked like pain and duty mixed together in equal proportions. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before. You know anything about telegraph history? About what these stations really did during their peak operations? Rachel shook her head. Her father had been an amateur radio enthusiast, had taught her about circuits and frequencies and electromagnetic propagation. But telegraph history had never come up during their workshop sessions before he died. This station wasn't just commercial. During World War II, it was classified. Navy Communications Hub. They routed encrypted military traffic through here, coded messages that got transmitted to ships on the Great Lakes and beyond. The telegraph operators who worked here had security clearances. This building held secrets. That was 80 years ago. Why does it matter now? Because some of those secrets never got declassified. Some of them stayed locked up in this building when the Navy decommissioned the facility in 1947. The telegraph company that took over afterward, they had agreements with the government. Keep certain records sealed. Maintain certain spaces. Never discuss certain rooms. Rachel's skin prickled. What kind of rooms? Tommy looked at the locked door across the main chamber, the one with a modern padlock. Then he looked back at the newer section of brick wall. Then he looked directly at Rachel with eyes that held decades of carefully maintained silence. The kind you don't open unless you're prepared for what comes after. Before Rachel could respond, before she could ask the 100 questions forming in her mind, Lily's voice cut through the tension. "Mommy, I'm cold." The words brought Rachel crashing back to immediate reality. It was November. The building had no heat. She had a 7-year-old daughter who needed dinner and warmth and stability, not mysteries about World War II secrets. "We should go. I need to figure out where we're staying tonight." Tommy's expression softened slightly. "You can stay here. Second floor has an apartment. I've been living there. It's had a space heater, running water, even electricity on an old meter the city never shut off because they forgot it existed. Place is warm enough, clean enough, better than a car." Rachel wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain independence and pride and the illusion that she didn't need help. But Lily was shivering, and the Honda's back seat was cold, even with blankets, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "Just for tonight, until I figure things out. However long you need. Consider it rent payment for letting me keep maintaining the equipment." They climbed the stairs, Tommy leading with his flashlight, Rachel's phone battery down to 17% now. The apartment revealed itself as surprisingly livable. One bedroom with a mattress that looked clean enough, a small living area with a couch older than Rachel, a kitchen with appliances from the 1970s that somehow still functioned. Tommy showed them the space heater, the bathroom with its ancient but operational plumbing, the hot plate for cooking. He'd been living here for years, had made it work through persistence and the kind of mechanical competence that Rachel recognized because her father had possessed it too. "There's canned soup in the cupboard. Help yourself. I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Don't go into the basement. Stairs are rotted through. Don't open that locked door until you understand what you're dealing with." He left them there, his footsteps creaking down the stairs, leaving Rachel and Lily alone in an apartment that was somehow, impossibly, warmer and more secure than anywhere they'd slept in 4 months. Lily collapsed onto the couch with the particular exhaustion of children who'd used all their bravery for the day. "This is really ours." Rachel sat beside her daughter, pulling her close. "The building is ours. I don't know for how long, or what we're going to do with it. But for tonight, yes. This is ours." "Do you think Tommy is telling the truth? About the secrets?" Rachel thought about the newer brick wall, about Tommy's face when she'd asked what was behind it, about the locked door with its modern padlock, about buildings that held histories longer than their occupants lived. "I think Tommy knows more than he's saying. But I also think he's telling the truth about things being protected. Some secrets stay secret for good reasons." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing with the seriousness that poverty and homelessness had taught her. "Are we going to open the door?" "Maybe. Eventually. But first we need to survive. Food, heat, figuring out how to keep this place. The mysteries can wait." That night, after heating soup on the hot plate and tucking Lily into the bedroom's ancient mattress, Rachel stood at the apartment window, looking down at Harbor Street. The industrial district stretched into darkness, Lake Superior a black void beyond. The Honda sat at the curb, containing their 3 garbage bags of possessions and the cardboard box that still smelled faintly of Chinese food. She'd spent her last dollar on this building. She had no job, no prospects, no plan beyond surviving day to day. But she had 4 walls and a roof. She had warmth and a door that locked. She had a mystery she didn't understand and a man downstairs who knew secrets about telegraph stations and World War II. Rachel pressed her hand against the cold window glass, feeling the November wind push against it from outside. Tomorrow she needed to figure out electricity bills, water bills, whether the building's condemned status meant immediate demolition or whether she had time to fix it up. Tonight, she just needed to sleep without worrying about police knocking on car windows at 2 a.m., without calculating which Walmart parking lot was safest. She turned away from the window and checked on Lily, finding her daughter already asleep, curled under blankets that were thin but cleaner than what they'd had in the car. Rachel laid down on the couch, the space heater humming its mechanical lullaby, and closed her eyes. The building settled around them with the sounds of old structures adjusting to occupation, creaks and groans, and the particular acoustics of vast empty spaces. Somewhere below, Tommy was probably working on his telegraph equipment, maintaining machines that nobody needed anymore, keeping skills alive that the world had forgotten. And somewhere in this building, behind a newer brick wall, or a locked door, or hidden in spaces Rachel hadn't discovered yet, were secrets that Tommy thought were worth protecting. Secrets from World War II. Secrets about communications and codes, and things the Navy had wanted kept quiet. Rachel's last thought before sleep finally claimed her was wondering if those secrets included anything valuable. If the building she'd bought for $1 held more than just historical equipment and an old man's life's work. If somewhere in the shadows and dust was something that could change everything. She didn't know it yet, but that thought was more accurate than she could possibly imagine. The morning arrived with weak November sunlight filtering through the apartment's grimy windows. Rachel woke to find Lily already up, sitting at the small table, drawing in the notebook they'd gotten from the dollar store. The space heater had kept the apartment warm enough through the night that Rachel's back didn't ache quite as badly as usual. Tommy appeared at 7:30 a.m. with instant coffee in mismatched mugs and information delivered without preamble. County inspector comes Tuesday. Every condemned building gets annual inspection to determine if demolition is required. You need to convince him structure is salvageable, or they'll order immediate teardown. Rachel accepted the coffee, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. What are the criteria for salvageable? Building must be structurally sound, have no immediate safety hazards, show evidence of maintenance and intent to restore. You'll need documentation that you're bringing it up to code. I don't have money for restoration. Then you need to demonstrate you have a plan. Engineers can assess structural integrity without expensive fixes. You're an engineer. Assess it yourself. Rachel looked at Tommy over the rim of her coffee mug. Why are you helping me? Because if they demolish this building, 32 years of my work disappears. Because you're a veteran who needs a break. Because your daughter deserves a chance. He paused. And because if anyone's going to discover what's really in this building, better it be someone who might understand its significance rather than a demolition crew who'll destroy it without thinking. After Tommy left, Rachel spent the morning doing what she did best: engineering assessment. She moved through the building with a notebook borrowed from Lily's school supplies, documenting every structural element, every potential failure point, every detail that would help her build a case for preservation. The foundation was solid, poured concrete that had weathered nearly a century without significant cracking. The load-bearing walls were original brick 2 layers thick, built with the kind of excessive over-engineering that characterized pre-depression construction. The roof had leaks, but the trusses were sound. The floors showed water damage in places, but no structural compromise. She took measurements, sketched diagrams, calculated load capacities using formulas she'd memorized in college and refined through military engineering work. By noon, she had enough documentation to demonstrate that while the building needed work, it was far from structurally unsound. Lily followed her through the assessment, asking questions that showed genuine curiosity about how buildings worked. Rachel explained load-bearing walls and compression forces and why arches were stronger than rectangles. Her daughter absorbed the information with the focused attention of someone who'd learned that understanding how things worked was useful for survival. They returned to the main chamber, where Tommy's telegraph equipment filled the space. In daylight filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, the machines looked even more impressive. Rachel counted at least 40 individual units, ranging from small desktop models to massive installations that probably weighed hundreds of pounds. "Tommy," she called down the stairs, "can you show me how these work?" The old man appeared with the speed of someone who'd been hoping for exactly this question. His face transformed into something approaching joy when he realized Rachel's interest was genuine rather than polite. Which one? All of them. I want to understand the system. For the next 3 hours, Tommy taught. He demonstrated the basic telegraph key, showing how different patterns of short and long signals created letters in Morse code. He explained the mechanical receivers that would convert electrical signals back into audible clicks. He showed her the more complex systems, the multiplex units that could send multiple messages simultaneously, the encryption machines that scrambled codes for military use. Rachel's engineering background let her understand the electrical principles immediately. These weren't just historical curiosities. They were sophisticated communication systems that had solved complex technical problems with mechanical ingenuity rather than digital processing. These are worth a fortune to museums, she said, examining a particularly ornate unit labeled Western Union Model 1904. About $380,000 total if I sold to collectors. I've had offers. Always refused. Rachel did mental math. $380,000 could solve every problem she had. Could buy her and Lily an actual house, with heat and security and stability. Could fund Lily's education, cover medical bills, provide the cushion of safety that poverty had stripped away. But looking at Tommy's face, seeing the way his weathered hands moved across the equipment with the tenderness of someone handling something precious, she understood what selling would cost him. This wasn't just money. This was his life's purpose, his reason for existing, his legacy. I'm not going to force you to sell them. Tommy's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you, but I need to figure out how to keep this building standing. The inspection is Tuesday. Even if I prove structural integrity, they'll want to see I have resources for restoration. I have $11 in my bank account. The equipment generates income. Not much, but enough. I do demonstrations for schools, telegraph workshops for history enthusiasts. About $400 a month. That's not enough for building maintenance, property taxes, utilities. Tommy was quiet for a moment. That same internal calculation Rachel had seen yesterday playing across his face. There might be something else. Something worth money. But it requires opening doors that have been closed for a reason. The locked door. And what's behind the brick wall? They're connected. Part of the same system. Rachel looked at Lily, who was drawing on the floor nearby, making up stories about the telegraph machines being robot friends. Her daughter deserved answers, deserved to know what they were dealing with. But she also deserved safety, deserved protection from things that might be better left alone. What do you think is behind them? Tommy walked to the newer brick section, pressing his palm against it the same way Rachel had. I don't know exactly, but I know the Navy built something here during the war. I know telegraph operators who worked this station in the 40s refused to talk about certain rooms. I know the building's blueprints show spaces that don't appear in the actual structure, which means they were sealed off deliberately. Sealed spaces usually mean storage. What would the Navy want to store in a telegraph station? Communications equipment, maybe. Code books, encryption systems, or records. Lists of agents, operational details, things that would compromise security if they were discovered. Rachel's hand started to tingle, that particular sensation that came with recognizing significant information. Classified records from World War II would still be protected. If we found them, if they're still classified, there are laws about handling government secrets. Unless they were declassified and nobody bothered to retrieve them. Or unless enough time has passed that they're now historical documents rather than active intelligence. Either way, finding them could mean federal attention, historical significance, maybe compensation for preservation. Or it could mean legal trouble for disturbing government property. That's the risk. But the alternative is demolition. Once this building is torn down, whatever's behind that wall is lost forever, destroyed without documentation or preservation. Rachel walked to the locked door, examining the padlock more closely. It was a master lock, standard commercial grade, probably pickable with basic tools if she had knowledge, which she didn't. Her military engineering work had involved building structures, not breaking into them. Who put this lock on? I did, 20 years ago, after I found something that convinced me the door shouldn't be opened casually. What did you find? Tommy pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket, yellowed with age and handling. He handed it to Rachel. The paper was official Navy letterhead, dated March 15th, 1947, addressed to Telegraph Station Superintendent, Duluth Regional Office. The text was brief and bureaucratic. Pursuant to operational security protocols, the following spaces are to be secured immediately and maintained in sealed condition until further authorization. Subbasement Vault A, Communications Archive Storage B, and Equipment Chamber C. Access restricted to personnel with appropriate clearance levels. Violation of SEAL security will result in federal prosecution under wartime security statutes. The letter was signed by someone whose name had faded to illegibility, but whose rank was clearly visible. Rear Admiral. Rachel read it 3 times, her pulse accelerating. This letter doesn't say what's in those spaces. No, but it says they were important enough for an admiral to sign off on sealing them. Important enough to threaten federal prosecution. The war ended in 1945. Why would they seal spaces in 1947? Because Cold War was starting. Because nuclear secrets were being developed. Because the same communication networks that won World War II were being repurposed for new threats. Tommy's voice carried the weight of someone who'd studied this history extensively. This building wasn't just Telegraph Station. It was Communications Intelligence Hub. If you wanted to intercept messages, to decrypt enemy codes, to coordinate classified operations across the Great Lakes region, this is where you'd do it. Rachel handed the letter back, her mind racing through implications. If Tommy was right, if this building had been Communications Intelligence Facility, then sealed spaces might contain equipment or records or materials that had significant historical value. Museums would pay for original World War II cryptography equipment. Historical societies would fund preservation of classified records. The federal government might even offer compensation for returning materials that were still technically their property. Or she might open a door and find nothing but rotted equipment and disappointment. But standing in the November cold of a condemned building with $11 in her bank account and a daughter who deserved better, Rachel realized she didn't have the luxury of leaving mysteries unsolved. She needed every possible advantage, every potential resource, every door open that might lead to survival. How do we get through the lock? Tommy smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost mischievous. I've got bolt cutters in my workshop, but first we do this right. We document everything. We photograph every step. We create a record that shows we found this. We preserved it. We treated it with respect. That way, if there's anything valuable inside, we can prove chain of custody. If there's anything classified, we can demonstrate we weren't trying to steal state secrets. We were trying to preserve history. Rachel nodded. Her phone was at 8% battery, but this was worth draining it for. Let's do it. Tommy's workshop occupied what had once been a janitor's closet on the first floor, transformed through decades into a meticulously organized space that smelled of machine oil and solder. Tools hung on pegboards with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime maintaining complex equipment. The bolt cutters were exactly where he said they'd be, hanging between a vintage multimeter and a set of jeweler's screwdrivers. Rachel held the heavy tool in both hands, feeling its weight, its potential for revelation or disaster. Lily stood beside Tommy near the workshop door, the old man having positioned himself between Rachel's daughter and whatever might emerge from behind the locked door. The gesture wasn't lost on Rachel. Whatever Tommy suspected was behind that door, he thought it warranted keeping a 7-year-old at a safe distance. Last chance to change your mind, Tommy said, his voice carrying genuine concern beneath the words. Once we open this, we can't unknow what's inside. Rachel looked at her daughter, at Lily's thin frame and the backpack that still held everything the child owned, at the Honda sitting outside with nearly empty gas tank and 3 garbage bags of their possessions, at the $11.37 in her checking account that would maybe buy them dinner tonight and nothing tomorrow. We need this, whatever it is. She positioned the bolt cutters on the padlock shackle and squeezed. The tool's leverage was impressive, mechanical advantage turning her strength into focused force. The padlock resisted for a moment, then gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the main chamber like a gunshot. The lock fell to the concrete floor, and Rachel pulled the door open slowly. A staircase descended into darkness, wooden steps that looked original to the building's 1924 construction. The air that rushed out was cold, stale, carrying that same metallic smell Rachel had noticed when they'd first entered the building, but stronger now, more concentrated, mixed with something that smelled like old paper and machine oil. Tommy handed her his flashlight. "I'll stay up here with Lily. You go first. Call out what you see." Rachel descended carefully, testing each step before committing her full weight. The wood was solid despite its age, maintained by the same dry conditions that had preserved the telegraph equipment upstairs. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed a narrow corridor lined with brick, maybe 30 feet long, ending in another door. This door was different. Heavy steel, painted gray, with a wheel mechanism in its center like a ship's watertight hatch. Stenciled across the top in faded yellow paint. Restricted area. Authorized personnel only. USN Communications Intelligence. Rachel's heart kicked against her ribs. Communications Intelligence. Tommy had been right. This wasn't just a telegraph station. This was a signals intelligence facility, the kind where messages got intercepted, codes got broken, secrets got extracted from electromagnetic noise. She called up the stairs, her voice echoing in the confined space. "Tommy, there's a vault door down here. Navy Communications Intelligence markings. Can you open it?" Rachel gripped the wheel mechanism and turned. It resisted initially, decades of stillness making the metal reluctant to move. She put her back into it, muscles straining, and slowly the wheel began to rotate. One full turn, then two, then three. On the fourth rotation, something inside the door released with a mechanical clunk that sounded final and important. She pulled, and the door swung open on hinges that moved smoothly despite their age. Someone had maintained this door, had kept the mechanism functional. Tommy, probably, during his 32 years living here, checking on the sealed space but never entering it, keeping faith with Navy regulations written before he was born. The room beyond was approximately 20 feet square, concrete walls and ceiling, lit by a single bare bulb that flickered to life when Rachel found the switch. The electrical system was still active, drawing power from the same forgotten meter that kept Tommy's apartment running. The space was filled with equipment. Radio receivers lined one wall, military-grade units with frequency dials and antenna connections. A wooden desk occupied the center, its surface covered in papers held down by a telegraph key that served as improvised paperweight. Filing cabinets stood against another wall, 4 of them, gray metal with combination locks that had been left in the open position. But what made Rachel's breath catch was the safe. It dominated the far wall, massive and imposing, easily 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. The kind of safe that required professional installation, that was built into the structure itself, rather than simply placed there. Across its door in painted letters, U.S. Navy cryptographic materials, classified top secret. Rachel stood there trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just storage. This was an active intelligence installation, preserved exactly as it had been left in 1947 when the Navy sealed it up and walked away. She called up the stairs again. "Tommy, you need to see this. Can Lily stay up there safely? I'll give her paper and markers. She'll be fine for a few minutes." Tommy descended with the careful precision of a 70-year-old navigating steep stairs. But when he entered the room and saw what Rachel had found, his age seemed to fall away. His face transformed into something between awe and vindication. "I knew it. I knew there was something down here." They stood together in silence, taking in the space. Rachel moved to the desk first, examining the papers without touching them yet. They appeared to be communications logs, long columns of numbers and letters that made no immediate sense. Dates range from 1943 to 1947, documenting 4 years of whatever operations this facility had conducted. The filing cabinets drew her attention next. She opened the first drawer carefully, finding it packed with folders organized by date and classification level. Top secret, secret, Confidential stamped in red across manila folders that had yellowed with age but remained intact. Tommy pulled out a folder at random, opening it with hands that shook slightly. Inside were decoded messages, German military communications from 1944, intercepted and translated into English. Names of U-boats, movement orders, supply requisitions, the mundane logistics of warfare captured and preserved. "This is Enigma material," Tommy breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're looking at actual, decoded German communications. Do you understand what this means?" Rachel understood intellectually, but not emotionally. Her military experience had been construction engineering, building forward operating bases, and repairing infrastructure. Signals intelligence had been someone else's job, conducted by people with clearances she'd never needed. "Explain it to me." During World War II, the Allies broke German codes. Enigma, the cipher machine the Germans thought was unbreakable. We were reading their communications in real time. But that information was so sensitive that only a handful of people knew about it. These facilities, he gestured around the room, were where that intelligence got processed, analyzed, distributed to commanders who needed it. Why would they leave it here? Why not take it when they sealed the facility? Maybe they planned to retrieve it later and forgot. Maybe it was classified so deeply that moving it required authorizations nobody bothered to get. Maybe it was easier to seal it up than to properly dispose of it. Tommy was flipping through more folders, his expression growing more amazed with each one. "Rachel, some of this material probably hasn't been declassified yet. 78 years later, and we're looking at active state secrets." The implications settled onto Rachel's shoulders like physical weight. If this material was still classified, if they were unauthorized personnel accessing it, they could be violating federal law. But if it was declassified, if enough time had passed, then this was historical treasure, documentation of how the war was won. "We need to find out classification status before we go any further." Agreed. But first, Tommy moved to the safe, examining its door with professional interest. "We need to know what's in here. This is the real prize. Cryptographic materials meant code books, cipher keys, maybe equipment. If the Navy stored it behind a safe this serious, it was valuable." The safe had a combination dial, numbers from 0 to 99, requiring precision that Tommy clearly didn't possess. He tried a few random combinations without success, then stepped back with frustration evident on his weathered face. "We need a professional safecracker. That's not my skill set." Rachel examined the safe more closely, her engineering training kicking in. The safe was old, probably installed in the 1940s when the facility was active. That meant older technology, less sophisticated locking mechanisms than modern safes. But still formidable, designed to protect materials worth protecting. She noticed something odd about the safe's installation. The concrete around its edges wasn't original building construction. It was newer, poured separately, forming a frame that held the safe in place. And along the top edge, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a small gap where the concrete had shrunk slightly away from the safe's metal body. "Tommy, give me a flashlight." She climbed onto the desk, positioning herself to peer into the gap. The flashlight beam revealed a space behind the safe, maybe 6 inches deep, running along its top edge. And there, barely visible, was a small metal box attached to the back of the safe's upper frame. "There's something mounted behind the safe. I can't reach it from here. What does it look like?" Metal box, maybe 6 inches square. Could be electrical, could be mechanical. Might be part of the locking system. Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking. During the war, some high-security installations used backup systems. If the primary combination was forgotten, there'd be a mechanical override, something that could only be accessed if you knew where to look. How would we access it? We'd need to move the safe, or at least tilt it enough to reach behind. They both stared at the massive safe, calculating weight and leverage and probability of success. Rachel estimated it weighed at least 2,000 pounds, installed when the building was constructed, never meant to be moved. But the concrete frame around it wasn't structural. It was containment. And if they could chip away enough of that frame, create enough clearance, they might be able to tilt the safe forward just enough to reach behind it. I need a hammer and chisel, and probably several hours. Tommy smiled. I've got tools, and time is something we have plenty of. They returned upstairs to find Lily had created an elaborate drawing of the telegraph machines as a family, each one with a face and personality. She'd named them all: Martha, Bob, Gerald Jr. after the rubber chicken that apparently every proper building needed, and had written stories about their adventures. Rachel's heart squeezed at the sight. Her daughter was 7 years old, homeless, living in a condemned building, and still found ways to create joy from circumstance. Whatever was in that safe, whatever came from opening it, had to lead to something better than this. Baby, Tommy, and I need to work on something downstairs. Are you okay up here for a while? Lily nodded, absorbed in her drawing. Can I explore the second floor? Stay in the apartment area. Don't go into rooms that look unsafe. Take your phone. Rachel handed over her own phone, battery now at 5%. If you need me, call down the stairs. With Lily occupied and bare, who Rachel realized she'd somehow started thinking of the telegraph station as like it was a living entity, settled into their temporary home, Rachel and Tommy descended back into the vault. The work was slow, methodical, requiring precision rather than brute force. They started at the bottom corners of the safe's concrete frame, using a hammer and cold chisel to chip away material without disturbing the safe stability. Concrete dust filled the air, coating their clothes and hair, making them look like gray ghosts in the dim light. 2 hours in, they cleared enough space at the bottom to see that the safe wasn't bolted to the floor. It simply sat on a concrete pad, held in place by weight and the frame around it. That was good news. It meant tilting might actually be possible. For hours in, Rachel's arms ached from swinging the hammer. Her hands blistered despite the work gloves Tommy had provided. But they cleared most of the frame, creating gaps on 3 sides that would allow the safe to tilt forward if they could provide enough leverage. We need something to use as a pry bar, something strong enough to move this much weight. Tommy disappeared upstairs, returning 20 minutes later with a 6-foot steel pry bar that looked like it dated from the building's construction. Found in the basement storage, used for moving equipment when the telegraph company was still operating. They positioned the pry bar behind the safe's bottom edge, wedged it against the concrete pad, and both put their weight on the opposite end. The safe resisted, then shifted forward slightly, maybe an inch of movement that felt like victory. Again, Tommy grunted, and they repeated the motion. Inch by inch, the safe tilted forward, its massive weight fighting them, but gradually yielding to persistent mechanical advantage. When they'd achieved about 15 degrees of tilt, enough that the metal box behind the safe became accessible, they wedged smaller pieces of steel behind it to maintain the angle. Rachel climbed back on a desk, reaching into the gap with both hands. The metal box was held in place by 2 screws that had rusted into the safe's frame. She used a screwdriver Tommy handed up, fighting with the frozen screws until they finally yielded. The box came free, surprisingly light in her hands. She climbed down and set it on the desk, both of them staring at it like it might explode. The box had a hinged lid secured with a simple latch, no lock. Stenciled on its top, "Emergency override, authorized use only." Tommy looked at Rachel. "You're building your call." Rachel opened the box. Inside was a key. Not a modern key, but an old-fashioned skeleton key, brass, ornate, the kind that belonged in Victorian novels about mysterious mansions. Attached to it by a length of wire was a paper tag, yellowed and brittle, with typed instructions. "Emergency safe access. Insert key in auxiliary lock behind combination dial. Turn counterclockwise 3 complete rotations. Primary combination will reset to factory default. 50-25-50. They stared at the instructions, then at each other, then at the safe. "They left a backup key," Rachel said slowly, "in case the combination was lost. And they documented the process, which means they intended for someone to be able to access this, even if the original operators were gone." Tommy moved to the safe, examining the area behind the combination dial. There, barely visible unless you knew to look, was a small keyhole set into the decorative metalwork. He took the key from Rachel's trembling hand and inserted it. The key fit perfectly, turning smoothly despite decades of disuse. Tommy rotated it counterclockwise, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. On the third rotation, something inside the safe clicked, mechanical and final. Tommy removed the key and moved to the combination dial. His weathered hands were steady as he turned it with precision. 50. Turn the opposite direction. 25. Back again. 50. On the third number, the safe's locking mechanism released with a sound like a sigh, like something that had been holding its breath for 78 years, finally exhaling. Tommy gripped the safe's handle and pulled. The door swung open. The interior was divided into shelves, each one filled with materials that had been carefully organized before being sealed away. The top shelf held code books, leather-bound volumes with top-secret cryptographic embossed in gold on their spines. Below that, wooden boxes that might contain cipher machines or components. The middle shelves were packed with documents, file folders, loose papers, all organized with military precision. But the bottom shelf, the largest compartment, held something that made both Rachel and Tommy freeze in place. Metal cases, 12 of them, each approximately the size of a briefcase, aluminum construction, secured with numbered locks. Stenciled on each case in white paint. USN payroll transport. Authorized personnel only. Rachel's mouth went dry. Payroll transport. Tommy was already reaching for the nearest case, his hands shaking now. The lock was simple, numbered tumblers that someone had left set to 000. He clicked them, and the case opened. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had been carefully sealed, were stacks of currency. But not modern bills. These were old, vintage, the kind Rachel had only seen in museums. The topmost bill was a $500 Federal Reserve note, issued in 1934, bearing the portrait of William McKinley. Tommy lifted the bill with trembling fingers, holding it up to the light. These are real, original high-denomination notes. They stopped printing these in 1945. How much is in here? Tommy did quick mental math, counting the visible stacks. This one case looks like it holds about $50,000 in face value. 12 cases. His voice trailed off as the numbers became too large to process easily. Rachel opened another case, finding the same careful preservation. $500 bills, $1,000 bills with portraits of Grover Cleveland, all wrapped in oilcloth, protected from humidity and decay. The Navy had stored this payroll here and never retrieved it, either forgotten in the chaos of demobilization or deliberately left because moving it required authorization nobody had. Tommy, if each case holds $50,000, that's $600,000 total. In face value. But these aren't just currency anymore. They're collectible notes. High-denomination bills in this condition are worth far more than face value to collectors. These $500 notes might be worth $1,500 each. The $1,000 notes could be $3,000 or more. Rachel's legs felt suddenly unstable. She sat down hard on the concrete floor, staring at the open cases. She'd spent her last dollar on this building. She'd been prepared to fight for survival, to claw her way back from homelessness through sheer determination and whatever resources she could scrape together. She hadn't been prepared for this. We need to count it. We need to document everything. We need to... Her voice broke, overwhelmed by numbers that didn't feel real yet. Tommy was already pulling out his phone, taking photographs of the cases, the bills, the safe's interior. His voice was steady, grounding, the voice of someone who'd seen enough of life to know that fortune required careful handling. First, we photograph everything. Then we document serial numbers, denominations, condition. Then we research legal status. This is government property, probably. We need to determine if there's a process for claiming it, for declaring found property. What if they just take it back? Then they take it back, and we did the right thing. But Rachel, he looked at her directly, his weathered face serious. There are laws about abandoned property. After a certain period, especially when the government has made no effort to retrieve it, ownership can transfer to whoever found it. This has been sitting here since 1947, 78 years. That's well past any reasonable statute of limitations. Rachel wanted to believe him, wanted to let hope replace the caution that poverty had beaten into her. But she learned that luck didn't visit people like her, that windfalls came with catches, that nothing good happened without hidden costs. Let's document everything first. Then we figure out what to do. They worked through the rest of the afternoon, photographing each case, each bill, creating a complete inventory of what the safe contained. The code books alone were probably worth thousands to historical collectors. The cipher machine components were unique pieces that museums would value highly. The documents provided insight into naval operations during a critical period of history. But the currency was the real discovery. 12 cases, each containing carefully preserved high-denomination notes. Total face value, $627,000. Estimated collector value, based on Tommy's research using his phone, potentially $2.1 million. Rachel sat on the vault floor, surrounded by more money than she'd imagined seeing in her entire lifetime, and felt nothing but numb disbelief. This wasn't real. This was a dream, or a mistake, or something that would be taken away as soon as she reached for it. Lily's voice echoed down the stairs, pulling Rachel back to reality. "Mom, I'm hungry. Can we have dinner?" The words were so normal, so mundane, so completely disconnected from the discovery in the vault that Rachel almost laughed. Her daughter was hungry. Nothing else mattered more than that. Not codes or currency or Navy secrets. Lily needed dinner, needed her mother, needed the basic care that Rachel had been fighting to provide for 4 months. "Coming, baby. 5 minutes." She looked at Tommy, at the open cases, at the documented proof that they'd found something extraordinary. "We close everything up. We don't tell anyone yet. Not until we understand our legal position." "Agreed." "But Rachel," Tommy's voice was gentle, "your daughter is hungry. You have $11 in your bank account. One of these bills could solve that immediate problem." Rachel shook her head. "Not until I know it's legally mine. I won't risk theft charges. I won't risk losing Lily because I got arrested for stealing government property. Then let me loan you money for groceries. Call it rent payment for the apartment." Rachel wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her pride, wanted to solve her own problems without help. But Lily was hungry, and pride wasn't edible, and Tommy was offering help that came without judgment or strings. $40. I'll pay you back, however long it takes. No rush. They secured the vault, closing the safe door, locking it with the emergency key that Tommy now kept in his pocket. The cases remained inside, protected by 2,000 pounds of steel and the building's condemned status that kept casual visitors away. Upstairs, Rachel found Lily had drawn 17 more telegraph machines, each with increasingly elaborate personalities and backstories. Her daughter's ability to create entire worlds from imagination was something Rachel cherished, a resilience that homelessness hadn't broken. "Want to go to the store? We need food." Lily's face brightened with the simple joy of a child who'd learned not to take meals for granted. "Can we get real food? Not just granola bars. Real food. Whatever you want for dinner." They drove to the grocery store in the Honda, its engine making sounds that suggested mechanical distress, using gas that Rachel hoped would last until she could figure out their next move. With Tommy's $40, they bought actual groceries: pasta, sauce, vegetables, bread, peanut butter, things that could stretch across multiple meals. At the checkout, the cashier made small talk that felt surreal given what Rachel had discovered 2 hours earlier. "Cold enough for you? They're saying first real snow next week." "Yeah, cold." Rachel's voice was automatic, her mind still in the vault, still processing numbers that felt like fiction. Back at the building, she cooked pasta on Tommy's hot plate, while Lily set the small table with elaborate care, folding napkins into shapes that approximated swans. They ate together, mother and daughter, in a warm apartment above a telegraph station that held $2.1 million in forgotten Navy currency. After Lily went to bed, after checking 3 times that her daughter was asleep, Rachel joined Tommy in his workshop. The old man had been researching legal precedents on his laptop, reading about found property, abandoned assets, government claims to historical materials. "There's good news and complicated news," he said without preamble. Good news. Abandoned property laws in Minnesota state that after 20 years, if the original owner has made no attempt to retrieve property, and if the property was left in a way that suggests abandonment, the finder can claim it. This has been here 78 years. The Navy has made zero effort to retrieve it, despite knowing this facility existed. What's the complicated news? Government property sometimes has different rules. Federal law can supersede state law in cases involving military materials. We need a lawyer who specializes in found property and government claims. Someone who can navigate the legal process without getting us arrested or losing everything to bureaucratic seizure. Rachel's hope, tentative and fragile, cracked slightly. Lawyers cost money I don't have. Some work on contingency. They take a percentage of the recovery if successful. Given the amount potentially at stake, finding representation shouldn't be difficult. What percentage? Standard is 30%. So, if we establish legal ownership of $2.1 million, the lawyer takes $630,000, we split the remaining $1.47 million. The numbers were so large Rachel's brain struggled to process them as real amounts rather than abstract concepts. $1.47 million, split between her and Tommy. About $735,000 each. Enough to buy a house, with heat and security and stability. Enough to fund Lily's education through college. Enough to rebuild a life from ruins. You'd split with me? Half and half. Tommy looked at her like the question was absurd. You bought the building. You found the vault. You have a daughter who deserves a future. I'm 70 years old with more yesterday than tomorrow. What am I going to do with $1.47 million? Die on a slightly nicer mattress. You could restore the telegraph equipment properly, create a real museum, pay for preservation of everything you've collected. I could, and I will with my half. But the point stands. You need this more than I do. We split it evenly, or I don't participate. Your choice. Rachel felt tears threatening, the kind that came from kindness rather than despair. She'd been living in a world where help came with hooks, where charity demanded gratitude as payment, where every assistance was a debt accruing interest. Tommy was offering partnership, equal shares, respect instead of pity, equal split. And thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still have to prove legal ownership, which might take months. And we need to be prepared for the possibility that the government contests it, takes it back, ties us up in litigation until we give up. I've survived 4 months homeless. I can survive litigation. Tommy smiled. I believe you can. Now, tomorrow we need to make some decisions. The county inspector comes Tuesday. That's 4 days. We need to decide if we tell them about the vault, if we mention what we found, or if we keep it quiet until we've established legal position. Rachel thought about that, weighing risks. If we tell them, they might seize everything immediately, declare it government property, remove it for safekeeping, and we never see it again. But if we don't tell them, and they find out later, we look like we were hiding it, like we knew it was there and deliberately concealed it. We document that we found it today. We have time-stamped photographs, your research notes, everything dated. That proves we didn't know about it when I bought the building. We're not required to report every discovery immediately. We're allowed reasonable time to research legal status before disclosure. Tommy nodded slowly. Reasonable time being measured in days, not months. So we get a lawyer consultation this week. We establish legal position. Then we report the discovery through proper channels, with legal representation, doing everything by the book. That protects us from accusations of theft while preserving our claim to found property. You've thought about this. I've spent 4 months thinking about every decision 3 steps ahead, planning for survival. This is just survival with bigger numbers. They talked until midnight, strategizing like military planners preparing for complex operations. Tomorrow, Tommy would contact lawyers, looking for someone with experience in found property and government claims. Rachel would continue her structural assessment, preparing documentation to prove the building was salvageable. Lily would be kept in the dark about the money until legal ownership was established, because 7-year-olds couldn't keep secrets of this magnitude. Rachel returned to the apartment, checking on Lily one more time before lying down on the couch. Sleep eluded her, mind spinning through possibilities and problems in equal measure. She'd gone from having $11 to potentially having $735,000. From condemned building to historical treasure. From homeless desperation to future security. But none of it was real yet. None of it was safe. The money was still in the vault, still technically government property, still vulnerable to legal seizure or bureaucratic indifference. The building was still condemned, still scheduled for potential demolition. The inspector was coming in 4 days, and Rachel needed to convince him that this structure was worth preserving. She pulled out her phone, charged now using Tommy's electricity, and opened the photos she'd taken of the vault. The cases of currency, the code books, the cipher machines, all documented with timestamp and GPS coordinates that proved when and where they'd been found. This was real. She bought a building for $1 and found $2.1 million inside. The story was so absurd it felt like fiction, like something that happened to other people in clickbait headlines. But it had happened to her, to Rachel Morrison, veteran with PTSD, single mother, homeless woman who'd spent her last dollar on hope disguised as a condemned building. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Legal complexity, potential government intervention, the county inspector, the constant low-level crisis of surviving with no resources. But tonight, lying on a couch in a warm apartment above a telegraph station full of secrets, Rachel let herself feel something she hadn't felt in 4 months. Hope. Real, tangible, justified hope that tomorrow might actually be better than today. Outside, Lake Superior wind howled around the building's brick walls, testing structural integrity, looking for weaknesses. Inside, Rachel finally slept, dreaming of warm houses and full refrigerators, and Lily having her own bedroom, painted whatever color she wanted. The money was still locked in a vault. The building was still condemned. The legal battles hadn't started yet. But discovery had happened, and that changed everything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is spend your last dollar on a mystery. Sometimes mysteries reward courage with fortune. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe decides that a single mother and her daughter have suffered enough, and it's time for the scales to balance. Rachel didn't know it yet, but in 4 days, the county inspector would approve the building for preservation. In 6 days, she'd receive a call from a lawyer who specialized in exactly the kind of case she needed. In 8 days, newspapers would start reporting on the Telegraph Vault discovery. In 3 weeks, the Navy would issue a statement acknowledging the materials had been abandoned and declassified decades ago. But that was future Rachel's story. Tonight's Rachel just needed sleep and warmth and the knowledge that her daughter was safe in the next room. For the first time in 4 months, that was enough. The weekend passed in a strange suspension between old reality and potential future. Rachel spent Saturday completing her structural assessment, documenting every beam and wall and foundation element that proved the building was salvageable. Lily helped measure distances, holding the tape measures in while Rachel recorded numbers that would determine whether they kept their new home or lost it to demolition orders. Tommy worked his contacts, making calls to lawyers, historians, naval archivists, building a network of people who might help navigate the legal complexity of found government property. By Sunday afternoon, he had 3 lawyers interested in taking the case on contingency, each one specializing in different aspects of what they discovered. The first was Margaret Shunn, based in Minneapolis, who'd successfully argued 5 found property cases against government entities. Her track record included recovering Civil War gold coins from a collapsed bank and establishing ownership of abandoned railroad bonds worth $800,000. She spoke with the crisp efficiency of someone who'd spent decades cutting through bureaucratic resistance. The key question is whether the Navy formally abandoned the materials or simply forgot about them. Margaret explained over speakerphone while Rachel and Tommy sat in the workshop Sunday evening. If they abandoned them, meaning they made a conscious decision to leave them and had no intention of retrieval, then Minnesota's found property statutes apply clearly. 20 years establishes abandonment. You're at 78 years. That's textbook. What if they argue they didn't abandon it, just forgot where it was? Rachel asked. Then we argue that 78 years of zero retrieval effort, zero documentation showing intent to recover, and zero response to multiple building ownership transfers constitutes constructive abandonment. They had countless opportunities to retrieve these materials. The building's been through tax auctions, ownership changes, even made local news when the Historical Society fought demolition in 2003. If they cared about recovering this property, they would have acted. The second lawyer was James Whitmore, a former Navy JAG officer who specialized in military property law. His voice carried the particular confidence of someone who understood both sides of the conflict intimately. The Navy will likely claim sovereign immunity initially, arguing that government property can't be claimed through found property statutes. But there's precedent for courts rejecting that argument when the government has shown clear disinterest in property for extended periods. The key is demonstrating that recovery would be unjust enrichment for the government. They've benefited from 78 years of free storage in a building they don't own, haven't maintained, and haven't paid taxes on. The third lawyer was Patricia Gonzalez, who'd worked extensively with veteran advocacy and understood the optics of the situation in ways that might prove valuable. This isn't just a legal case, Patricia said, her voice warm but strategic. This is a story about a homeless veteran single mother who bought a condemned building with her last dollar and discovered forgotten military property. The narrative matters. Public opinion matters. If this goes to court, we want the judge seeing you as someone who did everything right, not as an opportunist trying to steal government assets. By Sunday night, they'd chosen Margaret Shun as primary counsel, with James Whitmore as co-counsel for military property expertise. Margaret's retainer would be 30% of any recovery, with expenses advanced by her firm. If they lost, Rachel owed nothing. If they won, she'd walk away with approximately $735,000 after legal fees and splitting proceeds with Tommy. The papers were signed electronically, time-stamped, creating official attorney-client relationship that gave them legal protection for everything that came next. Margaret's first instruction was clear. Do nothing else until after the county inspection. Don't report the discovery yet. Don't talk to media. Don't give anyone ammunition to claim improper handling. Tuesday's inspection is about building preservation, Margaret emphasized. Keep it focused there. Once the building is approved for preservation, we have stable ground to stand on. Then we report the discovery through proper channels, with legal representation, doing everything by the book. Monday brought Rachel's first full day of understanding what they'd actually found. While Lily was at school, Tommy taught her telegraph operation, showing her how to send messages in Morse code, how to receive and decode them, how the entire system had worked during its operational years. His hands moved across the equipment with practiced grace, decades of muscle memory making complex operations look effortless. These machines aren't just historical artifacts, he explained, demonstrating a 1942 military telegraph unit. They're functional communication systems that worked without electricity, without satellites, without any of the infrastructure we consider essential now. In a real emergency, solar flare, electromagnetic pulse, complete grid failure, these would still work. That's why I've maintained them. Not nostalgia. Practicality. Rachel understood the logic because her military engineering work had taught her the same lesson. The simplest systems were often the most robust. Complexity created failure points. During deployment, when sophisticated equipment failed, they'd fallen back on basic tools and fundamental principles. Tommy had been doing the same thing for 32 years, maintaining communication capability that nobody needed until suddenly they might. How much would it cost to turn this into a real museum? Proper restoration, climate control, educational programming, everything needed to preserve this correctly? Tommy had clearly thought about this extensively. To do it right, about $400,000. That covers building renovation, proper environmental systems, archive quality storage for documents, insurance, endowment for ongoing maintenance. How about the plans drawn up? Been refining them for 20 years. Just never had the funding. If we get $735,000 each, you'd have enough. More than enough. Could establish a proper nonprofit, hire staff, create educational programs. This equipment could teach kids about communication history, about electrical engineering principles, about how people solved complex technical problems with mechanical ingenuity rather than digital processing. His weathered face showed animation that made him look decades younger. That's the legacy I want. Not my name on anything, just the knowledge preserved and shared. Rachel felt the weight of that responsibility settling onto her shoulders. If they succeeded in claiming the Navy's abandoned property, she wouldn't just be securing her own future. She'd be funding Tommy's life work, ensuring that 32 years of dedication resulted in something permanent and valuable. Monday afternoon brought visitors. Word had spread through Duluth's small community about someone buying the condemned Telegraph Station. Most people assumed it was for demolition and salvage, but a few were curious about preservation possibilities. The first visitor was Carol Henderson, president of the Duluth Historical Society, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and sharper questions. She arrived carrying a leather portfolio and the air of someone who'd spent decades fighting to preserve history against economic pressure. I heard someone finally bought the Superior Telegraph Station. Please tell me you're not planning immediate demolition. Rachel gestured to her documentation spread across Tommy's workshop table. I'm a structural engineer. I'm assessing preservation feasibility. The building is significantly more sound than its condemned status suggests. Carol's face transformed into something approaching joy. We fought to save this building in 2003. The city wanted to tear it down for parking, of all the stupid reasons. We got it listed as historically significant, which prevented demolition but didn't provide funding for restoration. It's been dying slowly ever since. She looked around the workshop, seeing Tommy's preserved equipment, clearly reassessing the situation. Is Thomas Brennan still here? We heard he'd been living here, but nobody's seen him in years. Tommy emerged from the main chamber, wiping oil from his hands. Still here, Carol. Still maintaining what nobody else cares about. The telegraph equipment? You kept it all functional. Every piece. 40 units, all operational. Been running demonstrations for school groups who bother to ask, which is approximately 3 per year. Carol moved into the main chamber, her professional demeanor cracking into genuine amazement as she saw the rows of preserved machines. Rachel and Tommy followed, watching her react to equipment she'd probably assumed was rusted beyond recovery. This is extraordinary. Do you understand what you have here? This is one of the most complete collections of operational telegraph equipment in the Midwest. Museums would pay. She stopped herself, clearly realizing she was potentially bidding against herself. How much would you want for the collection? It's not for sale, Rachel said before Tommy could respond. We're planning to establish a museum here. Proper preservation, educational programming, public access. The equipment stays in the building where it's always been. Carol stared at her. That would require significant funding. We're working on funding sources. The Historical Society has grants available. Not enough for full restoration, but seed money for feasibility studies, architectural assessments, program development. If you're serious about this, we should talk about partnership. They talked for an hour, Carol explaining grant opportunities, tax incentives for historical preservation, educational program funding from state and federal sources. By the time she left, Rachel had a folder full of information and a tentative ally who could help navigate historic preservation bureaucracy. The second visitor was less welcome. Dale Morrison, no relation to Rachel despite the shared surname, was a property developer who'd been buying up Harbor Street buildings for years, waiting for the area to gentrify. He arrived in an expensive SUV and a suit that cost more than Rachel had earned in 6 months before losing her job. I heard you bought the Telegraph Station. I'm prepared to offer you $15,000 for immediate sale. That's more than fair for a condemned building. Rachel kept her voice level despite wanting to tell him exactly where he could put his offer. The building isn't for sale. Be reasonable. You paid $1. I'm offering $15,000. That's 15,000% profit. Take the money and walk away before the city orders demolition, and you're stuck with disposal costs. The building is structurally sound. I'm an engineer. I've completed the assessment. Demolition won't be ordered. Dale's expression shifted from condescending to calculating. You're planning to restore it? That'll cost hundreds of thousands. You don't have that kind of money. How do you know what I have? Because I did my research. Rachel Morrison, age 34, veteran, unemployed for 14 months, living in her car until last week. You bought this building because you had nowhere else to go. That's desperation, not investment strategy. The words landed like punches, each one designed to hurt, to diminish, to make Rachel feel small and stupid for believing she could succeed. She'd heard variations of this speech for months, from the landlord who'd evicted her, from the employers who'd rejected her applications, from Marcus's family who'd blamed her for the marriage failure. But standing in the building she owned, with Tommy beside her and $2.1 million in found property locked in the vault below, Rachel felt something shift inside her. Dale Morrison thought he knew her story. He had no idea what she'd survived, what she'd discovered, what she was building. Thank you for your offer. I decline. The building isn't for sale at any price. Please leave. You're making a mistake. This area isn't zoned for museums or public attractions. You'll never get the permits you need. I've been working Harbor Street for 5 years. I know every bureaucrat, every inspector, every council member. You're a homeless veteran playing property developer. It's embarrassing. Tommy stepped forward, his 70 years showing in his weathered face but his voice carrying steel. She asked you to leave. That's the second time. There won't be a third. Dale looked between them, clearly calculating whether pushing further was worth the effort. Finally, he pulled a business card from his wallet and placed it on the workshop table. When you're ready to accept reality, call me. The offer drops $1,000 for every week you wait. By Christmas, I'll be offering $8,000. By March, nothing. He left, SUV accelerating away with expensive engine noise that sounded like arrogance mechanized. Rachel picked up his business card and tore in half. Is he right? About the permits? Partially, Tommy admitted. Zoning is commercial industrial, not educational or cultural. We'll need variance approval from the city council. That's achievable, but requires applications, hearings, public comment periods. Dale has influence, but so does Carol Henderson. Historical preservation carries weight in Duluth. We've got a fighting chance. That night, after Lily was asleep and Tommy had retreated to his workshop, Rachel sat at the apartment's small table and wrote down everything that needed to happen. The list was long enough to be overwhelming, but she'd learned in the Army that complex missions required breaking down into achievable objectives. Immediate priorities: pass county inspection Tuesday. That was foundational. Everything else depended on the building being approved for preservation rather than demolished. Short-term objectives: secure legal ownership of found property. Margaret Chun would handle the legal process, but Rachel needed to support that with documentation, research, cooperation with naval archivists. Medium-term goals: obtain zoning variance for museum use. That required architectural plans, business proposals, community support, navigating city bureaucracy. Long-term vision: establish functioning museum that preserved Tommy's life work, provided educational value, generated sustainable revenue, and stood as proof that condemned buildings and homeless veterans could both be restored to purpose. The scale of what she was attempting should have been terrifying. 4 days ago, she'd been sleeping in a Honda with $11 in her bank account. Now, she was planning museum development, fighting property developers, navigating military property law. The transformation was so rapid it felt unreal, like she was playing a role rather than living her actual life. But Lily was sleeping in a warm bedroom. They'd eaten 3 real meals today. The building they lived in was legally theirs. Those were real accomplishments, tangible improvements that poverty had taught her to value. Everything else was uncertain future. Tonight's security was enough. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. The county inspector was scheduled for 10 a.m., which gave Rachel 3 hours to prepare. She'd already created comprehensive documentation, but presentation mattered. She organized her assessment into a formal report, printed at the library Monday afternoon, bound with covers that made it look professional rather than desperate. The inspector arrived exactly on time, a man named Robertson who'd spent 30 years evaluating buildings and had apparently developed immunity to optimism. He emerged from his county vehicle, carrying a clipboard, wearing steel-toed boots, and an expression suggesting he'd already decided this building was beyond salvation. "Ms. Morrison? I'm here for the annual condemnation review. Thank you for coming. I'm Rachel Morrison, the new owner. I've completed a structural engineering assessment. The building is significantly more sound than its condemned status suggests." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're an engineer?" "Master's in structural engineering from University of Minnesota. For years, military engineering experience. I'm qualified to assess this." She handed him her report. He flipped through it, his professional mask slipping into something resembling respect as he saw the technical competence of her documentation. This wasn't amateur work. This was proper engineering analysis, complete with load calculations, material assessments, and detailed recommendations for repairs. "You've been thorough." The building was condemned in 1998 based on external deterioration and assumed internal failure. But the foundation is intact, load-bearing walls are sound, and structural frame shows no signs of critical failure. It needs repairs, definitely. Demolition? No. Robert spent 2 hours going through the building, checking Rachel's assessment against physical reality. He examined foundation walls, tested floor joists, inspected roof trusses, measured deflection in load-bearing beams. Tommy followed at a respectful distance, answering questions about building history when asked, but mostly staying quiet. In the main chamber, Robert stopped to look at the telegraph equipment. "This is the Brennan collection? I heard about this years ago. Thought it was gone by now." "Still here," Tommy confirmed. "Still functional. We're planning to establish a museum." "That's ambitious for a condemned building." "The building won't be condemned after today," Rachel said with more confidence than she felt. "Your assessment will show it's structurally sound and suitable for preservation." Robert looked at her with an expression that might have been admiration or might have been pity. "Ms. Morrison, I appreciate your optimism. And your assessment is competent, better than competent, actually. But my job is public safety. Even if the structure is sound, there are code violations, permit requirements, accessibility standards. Bringing this building up to occupancy standards would cost $180,000, Rachel interrupted. "I've calculated it. Electrical upgrade, plumbing repair, ADA, accessibility modifications, fire suppression system, emergency exits. I've got the itemized budget in Appendix C of my report." Robert flipped to Appendix C, reading her cost breakdown. His face showed the internal struggle of someone whose job required skepticism, but whose professional training recognized quality work. "And you have funding for this?" "Funding is being secured, but that's separate from structural assessment. My question to you is simple. Is this building structurally sound enough to preserve, or does it require immediate demolition?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, looking around the main chamber, clearly weighing his answer carefully. "Structurally? Yes. This building is sound. Foundation is solid. Frame is intact. Deterioration is cosmetic rather than critical. With appropriate repairs, it could stand another 100 years. Rachel felt tension she'd been holding for 4 days release slightly. "So your recommendation will be preservation rather than demolition?" "My recommendation will be conditional approval. Building is structurally sound, but requires significant code compliance work before occupancy permit can be issued. You'll have 12 months to complete repairs and pass reinspection. If repairs aren't completed within that time frame, condemned status will be reinstated and demolition proceedings will resume." It wasn't full victory, but it was enough. 12 months. A year to complete repairs, secure funding, transform condemned building into functioning facility. A year to make everything they were planning actually work. "Thank you. That's fair." Robert handed back her report. "This is good work, Ms. Morrison. If you manage to pull this off, museum, preservation, the whole thing, I'd be impressed. Most people who buy condemned buildings are either demolition contractors or idealistic fools. You might actually be neither." After he left, Rachel sat on the workshop floor with her back against the wall, adrenaline crash making her hands shake. Tommy sat down beside her, both of them processing what had just happened. 12 months, Tommy said quietly. That's tight, but doable. If we secure the found property claim quickly, we'll have funding for repairs within 3 to 4 months. That leaves 8 months for construction. Possible, if we secure the claim. That's not guaranteed. No, but we've got solid legal representation, good facts, and moral high ground. Sometimes that's enough. Rachel pulled out her phone and called Margaret Shun, who answered on the second ring. Good timing. I was about to call you. Are you sitting down? Rachel's heart kicked. What happened? I contacted the Navy's Historical Preservation Office this morning, introduced myself as your counsel, explained what you'd found. They were surprisingly cooperative. Apparently, there's been an ongoing project to locate and declassify World War II-era communication intelligence materials. Your discovery fits exactly into that program. What does that mean? It means the Navy is prepared to acknowledge that these materials were abandoned, that they've been declassified under standing orders from 1995 covering all World War II signals intelligence older than 50 years, and that they have no intention of asserting ownership claim. Rachel's breath caught. They're not going to fight us. They're not going to fight you. They want documentation for their historical records, and they'd like right of first refusal if you decide to sell the code books or cipher equipment to museums. But the currency? They acknowledge it was abandoned payroll, that it's your property as finder, and that you're entitled to keep it. The words took several seconds to process. The Navy, the massive federal bureaucracy that Rachel had been prepared to fight for months, was simply acknowledging her claim. No litigation, no seizure, no bureaucratic warfare. Just straightforward recognition that she'd found abandoned property and was entitled to keep it. Are you sure? This seems too easy. Margaret's laugh carried relief. It's not easy. It's just logical. The Navy has no interest in fighting a homeless veteran single mother over currency they abandoned 78 years ago. The optics would be catastrophic. And honestly, the materials you found are more valuable to them as historical documentation than as recovered assets. They want to study the code books, photograph the cipher equipment, interview Tommy about the facility's history. You're giving them research opportunities they didn't know existed. So what happens now? Now we formalize it. I'll draft an agreement establishing your ownership with provisions for Navy historical access and documentation. You sign, they sign, it's official. Then you're free to sell the currency through appropriate channels. Auction houses, collector dealers, whatever gets you the best price. How long before money is actually available? Currency sales could happen within weeks if we find the right buyers. High-denomination vintage notes in this condition are incredibly desirable. I've already contacted 3 auction houses that specialize in rare currency. They're very interested. Conservative estimate, $1.8 million total. Aggressive estimate, $2.3 million. We split the difference, call it $2.1 million. Minus my 30% contingency, minus Tommy's half, you're looking at approximately $735,000 net. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to make the number feel real. $735,000. More money than her father had earned in his entire lifetime. More money than she'd expected to see across her whole life. Enough money to solve every problem poverty had created. Thank you, Margaret, for taking this case, for moving quickly, for believing it was worth your time. Rachel, this is the kind of case lawyers dream about. Clear facts, sympathetic client, logical legal framework, and a federal agency that's actually cooperative. You made my job easy by documenting everything properly and not doing anything stupid. Thank the military for teaching you protocol. After the call ended, Rachel sat in stunned silence. Tommy had been listening on speaker, his weathered face showing emotions he probably hadn't let himself feel for years. Hope, vindication, joy mixed with disbelief. We did it, he said quietly. We actually did it. We haven't sold the currency yet. Haven't received money. Haven't completed building repairs. There's still a lot that could go wrong. But the hardest part is done. The Navy acknowledged our claim. Everything else is just logistics. Rachel wanted to believe him, wanted to let hope replace caution. But 4 months of homelessness had taught her that good news came with catches, that fortune reversed without warning, that counting on anything before it was finalized was dangerous optimism. Let's wait until the agreement is signed, until money is actually in bank accounts, until we know for certain. That evening, Carol Henderson from the Historical Society called with her own good news. The Society's board had voted to offer a partnership, $50,000 in grant funding for architectural plans and initial restoration, with additional funding available once museum concept was proven viable. In exchange, the Historical Society would have board representation and input into educational programming. We want to help preserve this building, Carol explained. It's exactly the kind of project our mission statement describes. Historical significance, community educational value, preservation of irreplaceable artifacts. If you're serious about creating a museum, we're serious about supporting it. Rachel accepted immediately, understanding that the Historical Society's backing would be crucial for zoning variance applications and city council approvals. Carol's organization had credibility with local government that Rachel, as a newcomer, completely lacked. Thursday brought media attention. The Duluth News-Tribune had somehow learned about the Telegraph Station discovery, probably through Carol's Historical Society contacts, and wanted to interview Rachel about her plans for the building. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Martinez, arrived with photographer in tow and questions that ranged from sympathetic to skeptical. So, you're a homeless veteran who bought a condemned building for $1 and found valuable Navy materials inside? That sounds almost too good to be true. Rachel had learned in the Army how to handle interviews, how to stick to facts, and avoid emotional manipulation. I bought the building through county auction after it had been abandoned for years. The previous resident, Thomas Brennan, had been maintaining telegraph equipment stored here. During structural assessment, we discovered sealed Navy spaces that contained abandoned World War II materials. We contacted appropriate authorities, established legal ownership through proper channels, and are now working to preserve the building and create a museum. How much is the discovery worth? That's still being determined through appraisal and auction processes, but significant enough to fund complete building restoration and museum establishment. The article ran Friday morning, front page of the local section. The headline read, "Veterans $1 gamble pays off. Telegraph Station yields World War II treasure." The accompanying photo showed Rachel standing in front of the building, Lily beside her, Tommy in the background with his telegraph equipment. The story was mostly accurate, with only minor embellishments about Rachel's homelessness and the drama of discovery. What surprised Rachel was the public reaction. By Friday afternoon, her phone, which she'd had to include in the article for museum information requests, was ringing constantly. Some calls were from well-wishers, Duluth residents who'd seen the building decay for years and were thrilled someone was preserving it. Others were from historians, researchers, people who wanted to study the telegraph equipment or access the codebooks once they were properly archived. Several were from veterans organizations offering support and volunteer help with restoration work. But the call that mattered most came Friday evening. Dale Morrison, the property developer who'd offered $15,000 for immediate sale, called with a new offer. I saw the article. I underestimated the situation. I'm prepared to offer $200,000 for the building and all contents. That's fair market value for a commercial property in Harbor Street District. Rachel put the call on speaker so Tommy could hear. Her voice stayed level, professional, revealing nothing of the satisfaction she felt. The building isn't for sale, Dale. I told you that Tuesday. Be reasonable. You're a single mother with no income. You can't run a museum. Take the money, secure your daughter's future, and let professionals handle preservation. I'm a professional, structural engineer, military veteran, current building owner. I'm qualified to handle this preservation, and I have funding secured. From what source? Grants? Those take years to materialize. By the time you navigate bureaucracy, the building will deteriorate further and your opportunity will evaporate. My funding sources are none of your business, but they're sufficient, secured, and available on reasonable timelines. The building will be preserved, the museum will be established, and you'll need to find other properties for your development portfolio. Dale's voice shifted from condescending to angry. You're making enemies you can't afford, Ms. Morrison. I have connections with the city council, with planning commission, with every approval body you'll need. You want zoning variants? Not happening. You want occupancy permits? Denied. You want to operate a museum in an industrial district? I'll make sure you're tied up in bureaucracy until you give up. Tommy leaned toward the phone, his voice carrying decades of practice calm. Dale, this is Thomas Brennan. I've lived in this building for 32 years. I watch you buy up Harbor Street properties and sit on them waiting for values to rise. I know you've been paying off inspectors to condemn buildings prematurely so you can acquire them cheap. I've documented it. I've got photographs, transaction records, testimony from people you threatened. You make Rachel's life difficult, and that documentation goes to the FBI. Are we clear? Silence stretched across the line for several seconds. Then Dale's voice came back, quieter, controlled fury barely contained. You're both making a mistake. He hung up. Rachel stared at the phone. Did you really document corruption? Tommy smiled. 32 years in this building gave me excellent vantage point for watching Harbor Street transactions. I'm an amateur radio operator. I know how to intercept communications, how to record conversations, how to gather evidence. Dale Morrison has done questionable things. Whether I've documented them specifically or am bluffing is something he'll have to wonder about. You're bluffing? Probably. But he doesn't know that. And the threat alone might make him back off. If not, we'll deal with it when necessary. The weekend brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus Torres, Lily's father, Rachel's ex-husband, appeared Saturday afternoon. Rachel saw his truck pull up outside and felt her chest tighten with the familiar panic response that his presence triggered. She'd spent 18 months married to him, 6 months divorcing him, and 14 months trying to explain his absence to their daughter. Marcus emerged looking exactly as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing his Marine Corps veteran status like armor against criticism. He'd left when Rachel's PTSD became too difficult to handle, when her nightmares woke him too many times, when supporting a mentally ill wife felt like burden rather than commitment. Rachel met him at the building entrance, blocking doorway with her body. What do you want, Marcus? I saw the article. About the building, the discovery. I want to check on Lily. You haven't checked on Lily in 14 months. You missed child support payments, ignored my calls, acted like we didn't exist. Now you see newspaper article about money, and suddenly you're concerned parent? His jaw clenched, the gesture familiar from hundreds of arguments. I made mistakes. I know that. But she's still my daughter. I have rights. You have rights you abandoned. Parental rights require actually parenting. Sending $3,000 once and then disappearing doesn't qualify. I was dealing with my own issues, trying to get stable. I'm better now. I want to be part of Lily's life again. Rachel felt fury rising, the particular rage that came from watching someone claim credit for transformation while offering nothing to support others' struggles. You want to be part of her life now that we're not homeless? Now that there's money involved? You weren't interested. When we were sleeping in the car, you didn't care when we needed help. But newspaper mentions treasure, and suddenly you're Father of the Year. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? I'll tell you what's fair, Marcus. Fair is being present. Fair is paying child support. Fair is answering your daughter's questions about why daddy doesn't call anymore. Fair is everything you didn't do for 14 months. Marcus looked past her into the building, clearly trying to see what the newspaper had described. I just want to talk to her. 5 minutes. No, you lost that right when you chose your own comfort over your family's survival. You want back into Lily's life? Get a lawyer. File for custody modification. Go through proper channels. But you don't get to just show up and disrupt the stability she's finally found. I'm her father. Biology doesn't make you a father. Being present does. Come back when you figure that out. She closed the door before he could respond, locking it with trembling hands. Through the window, she watched him stand there for several minutes, clearly debating whether to push harder. Finally, he walked back to his truck and drove away. Tommy appeared from the workshop. You okay? I will be. Her voice cracked. He didn't care when we needed help. But now there's money, and suddenly he's interested? That's not fatherhood. That's opportunism. You handled it correctly. He wants back in Lily's life. He can do it legally, with documentation and oversight, not just showing up whenever it's convenient. Rachel nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. This was part of what came with fortune. People who'd abandoned her would return, claiming connection, demanding shares of success they hadn't helped build. She'd need to develop thicker skin, stronger boundaries, better filters for separating genuine support from opportunistic manipulation. Monday brought the call Rachel had been waiting for. Margaret Chun had finalized the agreement with the Navy. The document was 37 pages of legal language, but the core was simple. Rachel and Tommy were recognized as legal owners of all currency found in the building, with the Navy retaining rights to study and photograph other materials for historical records. Both parties signed electronically, creating binding agreement that transferred ownership officially. You're now legally entitled to sell the currency, Margaret confirmed. I've arranged for Sotheby's to send an appraiser tomorrow. They specialize in rare currency and have clients specifically looking for high-denomination vintage notes. We should have formal valuation by end of week. The appraiser arrived Tuesday morning, a man named Dr. Richard Zhang who'd spent 30 years authenticating historical currency. He examined each bill with jeweler's loupe and specialized lighting, checking watermarks, serial numbers, printing characteristics that distinguished genuine notes from counterfeits. His assessment took 6 hours. When he finished, he sat down with Rachel and Tommy to deliver results, his professional demeanor barely containing excitement. What you have here is extraordinary. 1,274 individual bills, ranging from $500 to $1,000 denominations, issued between 1928 and 1934. Condition is near mint for most, which is remarkable given the age. These were stored perfectly, climate-controlled, protected from humidity, never circulated. What's the value? Rachel's voice came out steadier than she felt. Conservative auction estimate, $2.1 million. Aggressive estimate, if we attract serious collectors, $2.6 million. I recommend auction with reserve price of $2 million. We'll likely exceed that, but reserve protects you from undervaluation. Tommy's weathered hands were shaking slightly. When would auction happen? We can schedule for 3 weeks from now. That's fast, but these notes are highly desirable. We'll promote heavily to currency collectors, investors, museums. I expect significant bidding competition. They scheduled the auction for December 18th, 3 weeks away. That gave Sotheby's time to catalog everything, create detailed lot descriptions, market to their collector network. It also gave Rachel 3 weeks to live in suspension between current poverty and future wealth. 3 weeks of knowing fortune was coming, but not quite believing it was real. The article about the Navy agreement appeared in Thursday's paper. Navy acknowledges veterans' claim to World War II currency, read the headline, accompanied by photo of Margaret Chun explaining the legal process. The story detailed how abandoned government property could transfer to private ownership under specific circumstances, how Rachel's discovery fit those parameters, how the Navy's cooperation demonstrated the difference between active government property and genuinely abandoned materials. Public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Veterans organizations celebrated the story as example of veteran resourcefulness. Historical societies praised the preservation effort. The comments section on the newspaper's website was filled with messages supporting Rachel, criticizing the Navy for leaving currency to rot, celebrating the fact that someone who'd served the country was benefiting from its forgotten assets. But mixed into the positive attention were darker elements. Anonymous comments accused Rachel of stealing government property. Messages suggested the Navy had been pressured into approving her claim. Some claimed the whole story was fabricated, that no one could really buy a building for $1 and find millions inside. Rachel learned to ignore the negativity, focusing instead on tangible progress. The Historical Society's architect completed preliminary renovation plans. 3 contractors submitted bids for the work, ranging from $165,000 to $190,000. The City Planning Commission scheduled her zoning variance hearing for January 15th, giving her time to prepare a comprehensive presentation about museum concept. Lily's school began studying World War II in early December, and Rachel brought her to the Telegraph Station to see the actual equipment that had been used during the period they were learning about. Tommy taught Lily basic Morse code, showing her how to spell her name using the telegraph key, how to decode messages from pattern of clicks. Rachel watched her daughter's face light up with understanding, seeing the moment when abstract historical concepts connected to physical reality. This was what the museum would provide: tangible connection to history, hands-on learning that textbooks couldn't replicate. Tommy's 32 years of preservation were about to become educational resource for entire community. The auction date approached with mixture of excitement and terror. Rachel had learned not to count money before it actually existed in her bank account. Too many things could still go wrong. Bidders might not materialize. Values might be assessed incorrectly. Last-minute legal challenges could freeze everything. She maintained emotional distance from the numbers, refusing to plan how she'd spend money she didn't yet have. December 18th arrived cold and gray, typical Minnesota winter weather that made staying inside feel like survival strategy. The auction was online, conducted through Sotheby's platform, with bidding starting at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Rachel, Tommy, Margaret Shun, and Carol Henderson gathered in the Telegraph Station's workshop, laptop open on the table, watching lot numbers climb as items sold. The currency lots were scheduled for afternoon session, following earlier sales of art and collectibles. At 2 p.m., the first lot appeared. United States $500 Federal Reserve notes, Series 1934, lot of 50 notes, near mint condition. Starting bid, $40,000. Within seconds, bidding climbed to $60,000, then $75,000, then $90,000. The numbers moved so fast Rachel could barely track them. At $110,000, bidding slowed. At $115,000, it stopped. Lot sold for $115,000, the auctioneer announced. That's 50 notes at $2,300 each, well above face value in estimate. Rachel did mental math. If the first lot sold for 15% above estimate and pattern held across remaining lots, they were looking at total significantly higher than $2.1 million. The auction continued through afternoon, lot after lot selling for prices that made Rachel's hands shake. By 5 p.m., when the final lot sold, total revenue was $2,487,000. Margaret spoke first, her professional voice barely containing excitement. Minus auction house commission of 12%, net proceeds are $2,188,560. Minus my 30% contingency fee, you and Tommy split $1,532,000. That's $766,000 each. Rachel stared at the laptop screen, where final numbers glowed like impossible promises. $766,000. She'd spent her last dollar on a building, and 3 weeks later, she had $766,000. The transformation was so complete, so impossible, that her brain struggled to process it as reality rather than elaborate dream. Lily appeared from the main chamber, where she'd been practicing telegraph, unaware of what had just happened. "Mom, can we have pizza for dinner?" The question was so normal, so completely disconnected from the fact that Rachel could now afford to buy pizza every night for the next decade, that she started laughing. Not polite laughter, but the kind that came from emotional overload, from stress breaking into relief, from the absurdity of a 7-year-old asking about pizza while her mother had just become 3/4 of a millionaire. "Yes, baby, we can have pizza, whatever kind you want." Tommy was sitting quietly, his weathered face showing emotions he'd probably forgotten he could feel. $766,000 was more money than he'd earned in his entire lifetime. Enough to establish the museum properly, to fund operations for years, to ensure his life's work survived beyond him. "I need to sit down," he said, even though he was already sitting. Carol Henderson was grinning widely. "This is the best museum founding story I've ever heard. Homeless veteran buys condemned building for $1, finds Navy treasure, uses proceeds to establish historical preservation facility. We're going to tell this story for decades. The money transferred to Margaret's trust account within 48 hours. After her fee was paid, after everything was divided appropriately, Rachel's bank balance went from $37 to $766,037. She stared at the number on her phone's banking app for 5 full minutes, trying to make it feel real. The first thing she did was cry. Not sad crying, but the release of 4 months of pressure, of sleeping in cars and counting pennies and wondering if they'd survive. The fear that had lived in her chest since the eviction notice finally loosened its grip, replaced by something that felt dangerously close to security. The second thing she did was take Lily shopping. Real shopping, not thrift store bargain hunting. They went to Target and bought new clothes that fit, shoes that weren't worn through, a warm winter coat that would actually keep Lily warm through Minnesota winter. They bought school supplies, art materials, books Lily had wanted but Rachel couldn't afford. The total came to $380, and Rachel paid without checking her account balance, without calculating how many days of food the money represented. The third thing was finding an apartment. A real apartment, not temporary shelter in a building without proper heat. She found a 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. First month's rent and security deposit paid immediately. Lease signed for 1 year with option to extend. Lily would have her own bedroom, painted purple because that was her favorite color. They'd have furniture and heat and stability. But before moving in, before leaving the Telegraph Station, Rachel made sure Tommy was settled. She paid 6 months of building utilities in advance, hired a contractor to start renovation work, established a nonprofit foundation with $150,000 initial funding to ensure museum development could proceed. Tommy would continue living in his apartment until the building was fully renovated, then would move to a proper residence nearby while maintaining his role as museum curator. The zoning variance hearing happened January 15th, exactly as scheduled. Rachel presented architectural plans, educational programming proposals, letters of support from the Historical Society and 3 veterans organizations. The City Council voted 5-2 in favor, granting variance that allowed museum use in Industrial District. Dale Morrison attended the hearing, speaking during public comment period about traffic concerns and property value impacts, and vague warnings about precedent. But his influence wasn't enough to overcome the story's appeal. Veteran preserves historic building, creates educational facility, uses found fortune to benefit community. The council members wanted to be associated with success, not opposition to preservation. By February, renovation work was underway. Contractors replaced wiring, upgraded plumbing, installed proper HVAC systems that would maintain climate control necessary for historical preservation. The exterior got cleaned and repointed, windows replaced, roof repaired. The transformation was visible from Harbor Street, the building shifting from condemned eyesore to restored historical facility. Local media covered the renovation progress, running weekly updates about museum development. Tommy gave interviews about the telegraph equipment, demonstrating Morse code transmission for news cameras, explaining how these machines had connected the world before digital communication existed. Lily appeared in several stories, the 7-year-old who'd lived in the building when her mother first bought it, who'd watched fortune being discovered in spaces that had been sealed for 78 years. The vindication Rachel felt wasn't about money, though money certainly helped. It was about proving everyone wrong who dismissed her, who'd treated homelessness as personal failure rather than circumstance, who'd assumed a veteran with PTSD couldn't contribute meaningfully to society. She'd bought a condemned building for $1 and turned it into a functioning museum. She'd found abandoned Navy treasure and navigated legal complexity to claim it properly. She'd gone from sleeping in Honda to establishing nonprofit foundation in 4 months. March brought the official museum opening. The Superior Telegraph Museum welcomed its first visitors with ceremony attended by mayor, city council members, naval historians, veterans organizations, and approximately 300 Duluth residents who'd followed the story through media coverage. Tommy gave the dedication speech, standing in front of his restored equipment, his weathered face showing pride that 32 years of patient work had finally resulted in permanent legacy. This building was scheduled for demolition. These machines were going to be destroyed or scattered. The history they represent was going to be lost. But one person, one homeless veteran with more courage than money, saw value where others saw only problems. Rachel Morrison didn't just save a building. She saved the memory of how communication worked before satellites and smartphones. She preserved the tools that won a war and changed the world. This museum exists because she believed condemned things could be restored to purpose. Thank you, Rachel, for giving my life's work a future. Rachel spoke briefly, keeping her remarks focused on history and education rather than personal vindication. But standing there, with Lily beside her, with the building warm and functional and filled with people who'd come to learn, she felt the weight of the past 4 months finally lifting. She'd survived homelessness. She'd survived PTSD. She'd survived being dismissed and mocked and told she was making mistakes. And she'd come out the other side with something permanent, something valuable, something that would benefit her community long after the immediate crisis had faded into memory. The man who'd mocked her that first day, the one who'd driven past laughing about her buying a condemned building, appeared during the opening reception. He approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable, and extended his hand. I owe you an apology. I said some things that first day that were cruel and wrong. You proved everyone wrong, including me. This place, he gestured around a museum, this is really something special. Rachel shook his hand, feeling no need for extended vindication. Thank you. We're proud of what we've built. If you ever need anything, construction help, donations, whatever, let me know. I'd like to support this. That was the moment Rachel knew they'd truly succeeded. When the people who'd mocked her wanted to help, when critics became supporters, when condemned building became community asset. The vindication wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about building something so undeniably valuable that even skeptics had to acknowledge it. By summer, the museum was attracting 200 visitors weekly. School groups came for educational programs. Veterans came to see communication equipment they'd used during their service. Amateur radio enthusiasts came to learn Morse code and telegraph operation. The facility was sustaining itself through admission fees, gift shop sales, and educational program revenue. Rachel had used her portion of the auction proceeds carefully. She bought a modest house, 3 bedrooms, good schools, safe neighborhood, and put the rest in conservative investments that would fund Lily's education and provide long-term security. She'd paid off every debt, established emergency savings, created the kind of financial stability that poverty had taught her to value above luxury. Tommy had done the same, establishing endowment for museum operations, funding preservation of additional telegraph equipment from other collectors, creating scholarship program for students studying communication history and electrical engineering. His $500,000 had become legacy that would outlive him by decades. The telegraph station that Rachel had bought for $1 was now valued at approximately $1.2 million. The building itself worth $400,000 after renovation, the equipment collection worth $380,000, the land worth the remainder. But more important than monetary value was purpose. The building that had been scheduled for demolition was now preserved historical facility, educational resource, proof that forgotten things could be restored to significance. 1 year after buying the building, Rachel stood on Harbor Street looking at the renovated facility. The brick had been cleaned, revealing original color. New windows reflected afternoon sun. The sign above entrance read, Superior Telegraph Museum, Preserving Communication History, in letters that echoed the original 1924 design. Lily appeared beside her, no longer wearing the worn clothes from their homeless months. Her daughter was healthy, thriving in school, secure in ways that poverty had prevented. She looked up at Rachel with the particular expression of a child about to say something important. Mom, do you ever think about how we used to sleep in the car? Sometimes. Why? I'm glad we don't anymore. But I'm also glad it happened because it taught us stuff about being brave and not giving up even when things are really hard. Rachel pulled her daughter close, feeling tears threaten for reasons that had nothing to do with sadness. "You're very wise for 8 years old. I learned from the best." They stood together watching people enter the museum, visitors coming to learn about history that had almost been destroyed, preserved by someone who'd had nothing but refused to accept that nothing was all she deserved. The story of Rachel Morrison and the Telegraph Station became local legend, told and retold with increasing embellishment over the years. Some versions claimed she'd found 10 million. Others said 20. The actual amount, $2.1 million in auction proceeds, was impressive enough without exaggeration, but stories never let facts interfere with good narrative. What mattered wasn't the exact numbers. What mattered was the principle. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is spend your last dollar on hope. Sometimes condemned things can be restored. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses as homeless, broken, unemployable turns out to be exactly who the situation needed. Rachel had spent $1 and found $766,000. But more importantly, she'd found purpose, stability, proof that her engineering skills and military training and stubborn refusal to quit had value. She'd given Tommy's life work permanent home. She'd created educational facility that would serve her community for generations. She'd shown Lily that circumstances didn't define worth, that poverty wasn't permanent, that courage combined with skill could transform everything. The Superior Telegraph Museum stood as monument to all of that. Restored building, preserved history, vindicated veteran, secure child, and proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe decided someone had suffered enough and it was time for fortune to balance the scales. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.